I'm Ashley, 29, a marketing manager who clawed her way up from nothing. My childhood was a constant struggle, putting myself through college while my parents funneled every resource to my younger sister Brooke. I never expected much from them, but nothing prepared me for that Sunday morning call that would change everything. The ultimatum was clear: pay for my sister's lavish wedding or be disowned completely. If you've ever had to choose between your financial future and toxic family ties, stick around. Drop a like, tell me where you're watching from, and subscribe to see how I handled the family who thought my bank account was their property. Growing up in our middle-class neighborhood in Boston, the dynamic in our family was clear from the start. I was the practical, responsible daughter, while Brooke was the princess who deserved everything. The contrast in how we were treated wasn't subtle. When I was 12 and Brooke was 9, I overheard my mother telling her friend, "Ashley's the sensible one. She doesn't need the extras like Brooke does." Those extras included dance lessons, new clothes every season, and the latest gadgets. Meanwhile, I wore hand-me-downs or clothes from discount stores. My mother would say, "You're not as social as your sister, so you don't need new outfits for every occasion." Even my father, who was typically buried in his newspaper or glued to the TV, would emerge to shuttle Brooke to her social events while I figured out public transportation to get myself to the library. Academic achievement was my refuge. I maintained a 4.0 GPA throughout high school, joined the debate team, and won a state writing competition in my junior year. My parents attended exactly one of my debates, the state finals, and left halfway through because Brooke had a minor cold at home. When I brought home my acceptance letter to the state university, my father glanced up from his dinner and said, "That's nice. At least you got a partial scholarship." My mother added, "We're saving for Brooke's future. She'll probably get into an Ivy League school." From age 16, I worked part-time jobs, first at a local grocery store, then at a coffee shop near school. I saved every penny I could for college expenses. Meanwhile, Brooke was encouraged to focus on her social development, which apparently meant expensive shopping trips with friends and summer camps that fostered her creativity. When college preparations began, my parents sat me down for a practical discussion. My father cleared his throat uncomfortably before saying, "We've looked at our finances, and we won't be able to contribute to your education. You understand, right? With your good grades and work ethic, you'll figure it out." What he didn't say, but what I knew all too well, was that they were saving their money for Brooke. I took out substantial student loans and worked 3 part-time jobs throughout college, at the university cafeteria, as a teaching assistant, and weekend shifts at a call center. Most nights, I survived on ramen noodles and free coffee from my workplace, studying until 2 a.m. before catching a few hours of sleep. During those 4 grueling years, my parents called occasionally, mostly to share updates about Brooke's social life or to ask if I could come home to help with household projects. I visited during major holidays, listening to endless stories about Brooke's accomplishments while my own went unmentioned. After graduation, when I received a job offer from a marketing firm in Seattle, I felt a profound sense of relief. 3,000 miles of distance seemed perfect. I packed my meager belongings into my used Honda Civic and drove cross-country, stopping only for gas and quick naps at rest areas to save money. The next 7 years passed with minimal contact with my family. Obligatory phone calls on Thanksgiving and Christmas. Occasional group texts that I responded to briefly. My parents rarely asked about my life, and when they did, they seemed to tune out during my responses, quickly steering the conversation back to Brooke. Meanwhile, I threw myself into building my career. Starting as a marketing assistant, I worked my way up to coordinator, then specialist, and finally, senior marketing manager. Each promotion came with grueling hours and proving myself repeatedly in a competitive industry. I developed campaigns for major clients, earned industry recognition for my innovative approaches, and built a respectable professional reputation. By 29, I had finally achieved some financial stability. After years of living with multiple roommates in cramped apartments, I had my own 1-bedroom place. I had paid off 2/3 of my student loans and was saving for a down payment on a modest condo. I wasn't wealthy by any means, but for the first time in my life, I wasn't constantly stressed about money. This hard-won stability made what happened next all the more jarring. It was a regular Tuesday evening when my phone lit up with my mother's name. I stared at it for a moment, calculating that we hadn't spoken since a brief, awkward exchange at Christmas, over 3 months ago. "Ashley? Is that you?" My mother's voice sounded unusually excited. "Hi, Mom." "Yes, it's me. Is everything okay?" "Everything is wonderful. Absolutely wonderful. Brooke is engaged." My stomach tightened slightly, but I managed to sound genuinely pleased. "That's great news. Congratulations to her. You remember Bradley, don't you? His father owns those car dealerships throughout Massachusetts. They've been dating for almost a year now." The fact that I'd never heard of Bradley before didn't seem to register with her. "The wedding is going to be magical," she continued without pausing. "They've already booked the Rosewood estate for next spring. It's that gorgeous venue overlooking the harbor, very exclusive. And you should see the dress Brooke has her eye on. A Vera Wang. Can you imagine?" For the next 20 minutes, I listened to details about flower arrangements, the 10-piece orchestra, the custom cocktails, and the honeymoon plans for Bali. Throughout this monologue, I made appropriate sounds of interest while finishing my microwaved dinner. Then came the subtle shift in tone I should have been expecting. "Of course, all these wonderful things have added up a bit more than we initially budgeted for," my mother said with a nervous laugh. "Your father and I are contributing everything we can, but you know how these things go. The costs have gotten a bit out of hand." I kept my voice neutral. "I'm sure it will all work out." "Well, that's actually part of why I'm calling, sweetie. Since you're doing so well now with that big promotion and all." She paused meaningfully. "We thought it would be nice if you could contribute to your sister's special day." The request hung in the air. I deflected as politely as I could. "I'd be happy to help Brooke find ways to stay within budget. Maybe I could look at some of the vendor contracts." "Oh, no, that's not what I meant," my mother interrupted. "We were thinking more along the lines of a financial contribution. You know, since you don't have the expenses of a family yourself." I ended the call shortly after, promising vaguely to think about it. But the conversation had left me with a knot in my stomach. Over the next week, the texts started arriving. "Just saw Brooke's cake tasting options, so elegant. Reminds me that we should talk about your contribution soon. The florist needs a deposit by next month. When can we discuss your share? Bradley's parents are being so generous. It would be nice if our side of the family showed the same support." Then came a call from Brooke herself, something that rarely happened. Her voice was sweet and reminiscent as she launched into stories about our childhood, conveniently edited to exclude the preferential treatment she'd received. "Remember how you always looked out for me, Ash? You were such a protective big sister." She sighed nostalgically, though I couldn't recall the protective relationship she was describing. "Anyway, I was thinking about how special it would be to have you really involved in my wedding. And speaking of weddings, I had no idea how expensive everything is. Mom says you've been really successful in your career." I murmured noncommittally, increasingly uncomfortable with the transparent manipulation. The culmination came in an email from my father a week later. The subject line read simply, "Wedding budget." Attached was an Excel spreadsheet with meticulously categorized wedding expenses totaling $65,000. At the bottom, a row was highlighted in yellow, "Ashley's contribution, $25,000. I stared at the screen, unable to process what I was seeing. $25,000. More than a third of the total cost. Nearly my entire savings that I'd been setting aside for a down payment on my own place. There was no question mark. No proposed or requested. Just a stated fact that I would be paying this astronomical sum for an extravagant wedding I had no part in planning, for a sister who had been given everything I had to work for. My hands trembled as I dialed my parents' number the following evening. I had spent the day alternating between disbelief, anger, and a sickening sense of guilt that I couldn't immediately dismiss their request. part of me still craved their approval, even after all these years. My father answered on the third ring. Ashley. We were just talking about you. Did you get my email? I did. I took a deep breath. Dad, I need to talk to you and Mom about this wedding contribution. Hold on, let me put you on speaker so your mother can hear. There was a rustling sound, and then my mother's voice joined in. Ashley? Have you decided how you'll send the money? A check would be easiest, but we can set up a bank transfer if that's more convenient for you. The casual presumption left me momentarily speechless. That's not why I'm calling. $25,000 is a huge amount of money. I can't just. Now, Ashley, my father interrupted, we know you've got that fancy job in Seattle. All that money you must be making, this shouldn't be a problem for someone in your position. My position? Dad, I'm still paying off student loans. I'm saving for my own future. I can't just hand over my entire savings. My mother's voice took on the wounded tone I remembered from childhood. After all we've done for you growing up, this is how you repay us? By refusing to help your only sister on the most important day of her life? What exactly did you do for me growing up? I hadn't meant to say it out loud, but the words escaped before I could stop them. There was a moment of shocked silence before my father responded. We put a roof over your head and food on the table, young lady. Don't act like you raised yourself. The Johnsons' daughter paid for her sister's entire wedding, my mother added. $60,000. And she's younger than you are. The Johnsons are wealthy, I pointed out. Their daughter is a surgeon. Well, we just assumed that with your career success, you'd want to be generous, my mother sniffed. Brooke would do the same for you. I bit back a laugh at the absurdity of that statement. Would she? She's never even loaned me $20. There was a commotion on the other end of the line, and suddenly Brooke's voice came through, thick with tears. I can't believe you're ruining this for me, Ashley. I've always looked up to you, and this is the one thing I've asked for. I've dreamed about this day since I was a little girl. The familiar guilt washed over me. Even as an adult, I was conditioned to put Brooke's feelings above my own. I'm not trying to ruin anything, I said, softening my tone. I just can't afford $25,000. That's more than half my annual take-home pay. Well, you could take out a loan, my father suggested, as if it were the most reasonable solution in the world. That's what people do for important expenses. A loan? I echoed incredulously. You want me to go into debt for a one-day party that I had no input in planning? It's not just a party, my mother said, her voice cold. It's your sister's wedding. But I guess we know where your priorities lie. The conversation continued in circles, with increasing emotional manipulation from all three of them. By the end, I was exhausted and overwhelmed. I need to think about this, I finally said. I'll get back to you. Don't take too long, my father warned. The vendors need deposits. After hanging up, I sat on my couch in the dark, feeling physically ill. The rational part of my brain knew their request was outrageous, but decades of conditioning had me questioning whether I was actually being selfish. Maybe this was just what families did for each other. Maybe I was the problem. The next 2 weeks were a blur of escalating pressure. My phone buzzed constantly with messages from my parents and Brooke. At first, I tried to respond politely but noncommittally. Soon, I found myself avoiding my phone altogether, the sight of it enough to trigger anxiety. My mother's tactics grew more creative. I was suddenly added to a family group chat I hadn't known existed, where relatives were actively discussing wedding plans. Before I could silently leave the group, my mother sent a message. Ashley, since you're contributing such a significant amount to the wedding, we wanted to include you in these discussions. Everyone is so impressed with your generosity. The responses flooded in before I could correct the misunderstanding. So wonderful of you, Ashley. Always knew you'd be successful. Such a devoted sister. The next day, my Aunt Rachel called. Just checking in, sweetie. Haven't heard from you in ages. Your mother mentioned you might be having some financial concerns about the wedding contribution? I gripped the phone tighter. Did she ask you to call me, Aunt Rachel? A pause. Well, she's just concerned. We all want Brooke's day to be perfect. I remember when you were little, you always said you wanted to take care of your sister. I was 8 years old and talking about helping her cross the street. Rachel laughed uncomfortably. Family supports family, Ashley. Your uncle and I contributed to all your cousins' weddings. The pressure campaign continued. Brooke sent daily photos of wedding dresses, each with captions designed to provoke guilt. This is the dress of my dreams, but it might be out of reach unless. Imagining walking down the aisle in this, with my big sister having made it possible. The designer is holding this for me until next week when deposits are due. The messages made my stomach turn, but nothing prepared me for what happened next. I was in a client meeting when my assistant interrupted with an urgent message. There's a couple in the lobby insisting they need to see you. They say they're potential clients interested in our marketing services, but they specifically asked for you and won't speak to anyone else. Puzzled, I excused myself and headed to the lobby, only to find my parents sitting there, smiling as if this was a pleasant surprise. What are you doing here? I hissed, mortified at their ambush of my workplace. We were in the area, my father said vaguely, though Seattle was a 5-hour flight from Boston. We thought we'd discuss the wedding contribution in person, my mother added. And see where you work. Is there somewhere private we can talk? I was speechless. They had flown across the country to corner me at my workplace. I'm in the middle of a meeting, I said firmly. I can't do this right now. And it's completely inappropriate for you to show up at my job. Well, if you'd return our calls, my mother began. You need to leave, I interrupted, keeping my voice low. Now. I'll call you later. After they reluctantly departed, I returned to my meeting, but I couldn't focus. My hands shook, and I kept losing my train of thought. My boss noticed, shooting me concerned glances. Later that afternoon, I discovered they had approached several of my colleagues, asking questions about the company's performance and salary ranges. My humiliation was complete. That evening, I called Madison, my best friend since college. We'd met in the university cafeteria where we both worked, bonding over shared shifts and similar backgrounds. They did what? Madison exclaimed after I recounted the day's events. Showed up at my workplace. Like that's normal behavior. My voice cracked. Ash, this isn't just inappropriate, it's harassment, Madison said. You've worked so hard for everything you have. Do they have any idea what you've been through to get where you are? They don't care, I replied, the realization settling heavily. They've never cared. I was expected to take care of myself, and now I'm expected to take care of Brooke too. Remember when you were working 3 jobs and still had to choose between textbooks and groceries some weeks? Madison asked. Where were they then? Did they ever once offer to help with your student loans or send you money when your car broke down? No, I whispered. And now they want $25,000 for a party? Absolutely not. Madison's indignation was validating. You need to set some serious boundaries, Ash. This isn't going to stop unless you make it stop. After our conversation, I felt stronger. Madison was right, I needed to establish clear boundaries. I decided to have one final conversation with my family, making my position crystal clear. No more deflection or vague promises to think about it. It was time to stand my ground. I scheduled a video call for Sunday afternoon, giving myself time to prepare both emotionally and practically. I wrote down talking points, practiced with Madison, and even consulted with a financial advisor who confirmed what I already knew. Contributing $25,000 would significantly impact my financial health and future goals. When my laptop screen filled with my parents' faces, and Brooke's, though she hadn't been invited to the call, I took a deep breath and reminded myself of my worth. Thank you for making time for this conversation, I began formally. I wanted to discuss the wedding contribution directly so there's no misunderstanding. My father nodded encouragingly, clearly expecting me to announce how I would provide the money. After careful consideration of my financial situation, I've determined that I cannot contribute $25,000 to the wedding. The encouraging expressions froze, then transformed into disbelief. What do you mean, you cannot? My mother asked. We've already told everyone you're helping. The deposits are due this week. I understand that puts you in an awkward position, and I'm sorry about that, I continued, sticking to my script. However, I was never consulted about this amount. It was simply presented to me as an obligation. My father leaned toward the camera. It's not an obligation, Ashley. It's what family does. You support each other. I agree that family supports each other, I replied. But support goes both ways. When I was struggling through college, working multiple jobs and taking out loans, I didn't receive financial support. That was different, my mother dismissed. You were always independent. And we had to save for Brooke's future. And now Brooke's future includes a $65,000 wedding that you expect me to fund a third of, I pointed out. That's not fair or reasonable. Brooke's face crumpled into tears. I can't believe you're ruining my special day over money. After everything our family has done for you. What exactly has our family done for me, Brooke? I asked quietly. We've always been there for you, she cried. Remember when you had pneumonia in 10th grade, and Mom made you soup? The absurdity of her example nearly made me laugh. Yes, I remember. I also remember going back to school while I was still sick because Mom said she couldn't miss her book club to stay home with me. You've always been selfish, my father interjected, his voice rising. Always thinking about yourself first. When you were 8, you wouldn't even let Brooke play with your science kit. That science kit was a prize I won in the school fair, I replied, struggling to keep my voice level. Brooke had broken my things before, and it was the one nice thing I owned. See? Selfish from the start, my mother agreed. Remember when you refused to give Brooke your prom dress? She cried for days. That prom dress that I bought with my own money from working at the grocery store? The one I'd saved for months to afford? I clarified. The same prom where you bought Brooke 3 new dress options even though she was only a freshman and wasn't even going? My parents exchanged glances, clearly not expecting me to challenge their revisionist history. The point is, my father said, his face reddening, family makes sacrifices for each other. Your mother and I sacrificed for years to give you girls a good home. And I appreciate that, I said sincerely. But asking me for $25,000, more than half my annual take-home pay, isn't a reasonable sacrifice. My mother's expression hardened. What's not reasonable is watching your sister's dreams be crushed because you're too selfish to help. Bradley's parents are contributing $40,000. Do you know how it makes us look that we can't match that? And there it was, the real issue. It wasn't about giving Brooke her dream wedding. It was about my parents' pride and keeping up appearances. I'm sorry you're concerned about how it looks, I said, but I can't financially ruin myself for your social standing. My father slammed his hand on the table, making me flinch. Either you pay for your sister's wedding like a dutiful daughter, or you can disappear forever. We don't need your negativity in our lives. That's right, my mother added, her voice cold. You were always a disappointment anyway. At least Brooke appreciates what we do for her. Brooke, sensing her opportunity, delivered the final blow. You never loved me. A real sister would do anything to make me happy on my wedding day. I wish I were an only child. I sat in stunned silence, their words washing over me like ice water. Despite preparing for this conversation, nothing could have readied me for the naked hostility and manipulation. In that moment, I saw my family clearly for perhaps the first time, not as the people I wished they were, but as they truly were. Without another word, I ended the call. Then I turned off my phone, curled up on my couch, and broke down completely. Years of suppressed hurt, disappointment, and rejection poured out in racking sobs that left me gasping for breath. That night, I barely slept. When I did drift off, I had anxiety dreams about being lost, about drowning, about standing naked on a stage while my family pointed and laughed. I woke up with swollen eyes and a splitting headache, feeling as though I'd been hit by a truck. The worst part wasn't their anger or even their ultimatum. It was the realization that I had spent my entire life seeking approval from people who were fundamentally incapable of giving it. No achievement, no sacrifice would ever be enough, because they had decided long ago that my role was to give while Brooks was to receive. The morning after the confrontation, I called in sick to work for the first time in 3 years. I couldn't face people, couldn't summon the energy to shower or eat. I lay in bed, alternating between numbness and waves of grief so intense they left me physically ill. My phone, which I had finally turned back on, buzzed constantly with notifications. I forced myself to look, needing to know what I was facing. The messages were worse than I had imagined. From my father: "Your selfishness has broken your mother's heart. I hope you're satisfied." From my mother: "After everything we've done for you. Brooke cried all night because of you." From Brooke: "Thanks for ruining my life. Bradley's parents think our family is pathetic now." But the family assault went beyond my immediate family. Extended relatives I rarely spoke with had apparently been enlisted in the campaign. Family supports family. "Very disappointed in you. Uncle Dave. How could you do this to your sister? Aunt Patty. Thought you were raised better than this. Cousin Jennifer." Each message was like a fresh slap. The family narrative had clearly been established. I was the villain who had selfishly destroyed Brooke's perfect wedding out of spite and greed. I was considering blocking everyone when a different kind of message appeared, from my grandmother. "Ashley, dear. I heard there was some trouble. Call me when you can. I love you." Grandmother Rachel was my father's mother, a quiet, gentle woman who had always shown me small kindnesses, slipping me a $20 bill for books when I visited, sending thoughtful birthday cards, asking about my interests in a way my parents never did. We weren't particularly close. She lived in Florida and I saw her rarely, but her message stood out like a beacon in the storm. I called her immediately, my voice breaking as soon as she answered. "Oh, sweetheart," she said when I had finished telling her everything. "I was afraid something like this might happen." "What do you mean?" I asked, surprised by her lack of surprise. "Your mother did the same thing to your Uncle Robert when your cousin Lisa got married. Demanded he pay for the honeymoon because he was doing so well at his law firm." Grandmother sighed heavily. "He refused, and there was a similar explosion. They didn't speak for nearly 2 years. "I didn't know that," I said softly, realizing how much family history I was unaware of. "Your mother has always had expectations about how others should finance her plans," Grandmother explained delicately. "And your father enables it. When they were first married, they tried to convince me to remortgage my house to buy them a vacation property." This revelation stunned me. I had always believed the dynamic in our family was unique to my relationship with my parents and Brooke. Learning that it was part of a larger pattern both validated my experience and deepened my sadness. "What happened with Uncle Robert?" I asked. "They seem fine now. Eventually, your mother needed something from him, legal advice when she was in that fender bender. She acted like nothing had happened." Grandmother paused. "But Robert had changed. He learned to keep her at arm's length. You can have a relationship with your parents, Ashley, but it might need to be different from what you've hoped for." After talking to Grandmother, I felt strong enough to make another important call, to Dr. Reynolds, a therapist I had seen briefly after a panic attack last year. Fortunately, she had an opening that afternoon. In her calm office, surrounded by plants and soft lighting, I unloaded the entire story. Dr. Reynolds listened attentively, occasionally asking clarifying questions. "What you're describing sounds like a family system with clear roles," she explained after I'd finished. "In family systems theory, there's often a golden child and a scapegoat. From what you've shared, your sister was cast as the golden child, the special one who deserves everything. While you were cast as the scapegoat, expected to be self-sufficient and then later to provide for others. But why? I asked, the question that had haunted me for years. Why did they choose those roles for us? Family dynamics are complex, Dr. Reynolds replied. Sometimes parents recreate patterns from their own childhoods. Sometimes they project their own insecurities onto their children. What matters now is recognizing that this isn't about you failing as a daughter or sister. This is about unreasonable expectations and emotional manipulation. We spent the session exploring the concept of emotional abuse, a term I had never applied to my family situation but which fit disturbingly well. Dr. Reynolds helped me see how my parents' behavior, the favoritism, the gaslighting, the emotional blackmail, had affected my self-worth and decision-making. The ultimatum your father gave you is actually a gift in disguise, she suggested. It clarifies the terms of your relationship. You're valued for what you can provide, not for who you are. That's painful to accept, but it allows you to make informed choices about what kind of relationship you want going forward, if any. As I left her office, I felt a strange mix of grief and liberation. The grief was for the loving family I had never had and would never have. The liberation came from finally seeing the truth and knowing I could stop chasing an impossible goal. Over the next few days, I began to process years of unfair treatment. Memories surfaced, birthdays forgotten while Brooks were celebrated elaborately, achievements dismissed while Brooks' minor accomplishments were praised endlessly, needs ignored while Brooks' whims were indulged. What I had accepted as normal was anything but. And for the first time I allowed myself to feel angry about it. Not the defensive, reactive anger of our confrontation, but a deep, cleansing anger at the injustice of it all. In that anger, I found strength. After a week of reflection, therapy, and conversations with trusted friends, I was ready to respond to my family. I needed to make a decision that honored both my financial reality and my emotional well-being. First, I consulted with Melissa Wong, a financial advisor recommended by a colleague. I showed her my financial situation in detail, my income, expenses, remaining student loan debt, savings, and future goals. If you were my client asking whether you should contribute $25,000 to a sibling's wedding, Melissa said bluntly, I would strongly advise against it. That amount would deplete almost all your emergency fund and down payment savings. It would set your financial goals back by years. What if I contributed a smaller amount? I asked, still feeling a pull of obligation despite everything. Melissa helped me calculate what I could reasonably afford without compromising my financial security. The number we arrived at was $2,000, a generous gift by normal standards, but far below what my parents demanded. Remember, Melissa added, financial boundaries are important. Just like you wouldn't let a friend drain your bank account, you shouldn't let family do it either, regardless of the occasion. Armed with this clarity, I drafted an email to my parents and Brooke. I revised it multiple times, removing emotional language and keeping it factual and firm. After having Madison review it for tone, I finally had a version I was comfortable with. Dear Mom, Dad, and Brooke. After careful consideration of my financial situation and consultation with a financial advisor, I want to clearly communicate my decision regarding Brooke's wedding. I am able to contribute $2,000 toward the wedding expenses. This is the maximum amount I can provide while maintaining my financial stability and continuing to meet my existing obligations, including my remaining student loans. I understand this is less than you requested. If this contribution is unwelcome or insufficient, I understand, and you should proceed with your plans without including me financially. I wish Brooke and Bradley happiness in their marriage and would still like to attend the wedding as a guest. However, I need to establish some boundaries. 1. I will not take on debt for wedding expenses. 2. I will not deplete my emergency savings or future security. 3. I will not tolerate further harassment about this decision, whether from immediate or extended family. If these boundaries cannot be respected, I will need to take a step back from our relationship temporarily for my own well-being. I hope we can move forward in a healthy way. Ashley. Before I could second-guess myself, I hit send. Then I turned off my phone and went for a long hike at Discovery Park, one of my favorite places to clear my head. The Pacific Northwest air, cool and damp against my face, felt cleansing. For hours, I walked along forested trails and rocky beaches, watching eagles soar overhead and ferry boats cross the Sound. By the time I returned home, I felt surprisingly at peace. Whatever happened next, I had stood up for myself with dignity and clarity. When I finally turned my phone back on, the flood of notifications was immediate and overwhelming. Missed calls, voicemails, texts, emails, all from family members. I took a deep breath and began sorting through them. The responses were predictably hostile. "My father, your insulting offer and threatening email show your true colors. Either contribute the full amount or consider yourself no longer part of this family." "My mother, how dare you set boundaries with your own family? We gave you life and raised you, and this is how you repay us? $2,000 wouldn't even cover the flowers. Brooke, thanks for ruining my life. Bradley's parents are embarrassed to be associated with our family now. I hate you." Various relatives had also chimed in, clearly having been shown my private email. The narrative had shifted slightly. Now I was not only selfish but also threatening my family with ridiculous boundaries. One message stood out, from grandmother Rachel: "I'm proud of you, Ashley. Standing up for yourself isn't easy, especially with family. Call me anytime." I sat with the responses for a while, letting the emotions wash over me without drowning in them. The ultimatum had been restated: pay the full amount or be cut off from the family. In that moment, a strange clarity came over me. They had presented this as a devastating consequence, but was it really? What would I actually be losing if I were no longer part of this family? Not unconditional love, I'd never had that. Not emotional support, they'd never provided that. Not financial help, I'd always been on my own. Not authentic connection, our interactions were superficial at best. The only real loss would be the hope, the increasingly unrealistic hope, that someday they would become the family I needed them to be. With this realization, I made my decision. I would take my father at his word and disappear from their lives, at least for now. Not out of spite or anger, but as an act of self-preservation and self-respect. I drafted one final message to the three of them. I understand and accept your decision to cut ties. I will not be contributing beyond the $2,000 I offered, and I will respect your wish for me to step back from the family. I wish you all well. Ashley. After sending it, I methodically blocked their numbers and social media accounts. Not permanently, perhaps, but for long enough to protect my mental health and establish that my boundaries were non-negotiable. The immediate aftermath was a complex mixture of grief and relief. I cried for the family I wished I had, for the little girl who had tried so hard to earn love that should have been freely given. But beneath the grief was a growing sense of liberation, like putting down a heavy backpack I'd been carrying for years. Madison and my small circle of close friends rallied around me, offering practical and emotional support. We had movie nights, hiking excursions, and long conversations where, for the first time, I felt truly heard. Grandmother Rachel called weekly, sharing family stories I'd never heard and offering her quiet encouragement. "Your grandfather would have been so proud of you," she told me once. "He believed in living with integrity, even when it was difficult." I threw myself into therapy, working with Dr. Reynolds to understand the family patterns I'd been caught in and develop healthier ways of relating to others. I joined a support group for adult children estranged from their parents, finding comfort in the shared experiences of others who understood. At work, my performance improved now that I wasn't constantly anxious about family demands. 6 months after the confrontation, I was offered a significant promotion, leading the creative strategy team with a substantial salary increase. Gradually, I started dating again, having realized how much my family dynamics had affected my romantic relationships. I met Kevin, a kind, thoughtful environmental engineer who respected my boundaries and story without judgment. Then, 3 weeks before Brooke's wedding date, an envelope arrived in my mail. Inside was a formal invitation to the wedding, addressed only to me, no +1. No note, no acknowledgement of our estrangement, nothing personal at all. I was bewildered by this sudden inclusion after months of silence. After discussing it with Dr. Reynolds, I decided not to attend. The invitation felt less like an olive branch and more like another manipulation tactic, perhaps driven by guests asking why the bride's only sister wouldn't be present. I sent a polite decline and a check for the $2,000 I had originally offered, along with a simple card wishing Brooke and Bradley happiness in their marriage. Through grandmother Rachel, I later learned that my parents had indeed taken out a loan to cover the wedding expenses. The ceremony and reception proceeded as planned, though apparently scaled back slightly from the original vision. Seeing the wedding photos through a mutual acquaintance was strange, my family smiling and celebrating as if nothing were amiss, the conspicuous absence of the bride's sister unmentioned. I felt a complex mix of sadness and relief at not being there, recognizing it was the healthier choice for everyone. 6 months after Brooke's wedding, my new life had taken shape, one built on authenticity, mutual respect, and genuine connection. My promotion to Creative Strategy Director had come with challenging new responsibilities that stretched my abilities in exciting ways. Leading a team of 12 talented marketers, I found myself using the resilience and problem-solving skills I'd developed throughout my life in unexpectedly valuable ways. "You have an unusual ability to stay calm during a crisis," my boss remarked after I successfully salvaged a major campaign that had gone sideways. "And you're remarkably good at finding creative solutions under pressure." I smiled, recognizing that these strengths had been forged in the crucible of my childhood and early adulthood. The very challenges that had once seemed unfair had helped shape me into someone capable and resilient. My relationship with Kevin continued to deepen. Unlike previous partners who had grown frustrated with my guardedness, Kevin understood that trust developed slowly for me. He demonstrated his reliability through consistent actions rather than grand gestures, and gradually, I found myself opening up in ways I never had before. "I've never talked about my family like this with anyone," I admitted one evening as we sat on my balcony, watching the sunset over Puget Sound. Kevin squeezed my hand. "Thank you for trusting me with your story. It helps me understand you better." "Does it scare you?" I asked hesitantly. "That I'm estranged from my family?" "No," he said thoughtfully. "It tells me you're someone who values yourself enough to set healthy boundaries. That's something I respect." Madison and my small circle of friends had become what I now recognized as my chosen family, people who supported me not out of obligation but out of genuine care and shared values. We celebrated holidays together, helped each other through difficulties, and took joy in each other's successes without competition or conditions. My therapy sessions with Dr. Reynolds had shifted from crisis management to deeper healing and growth. We worked on recognizing and changing patterns I had internalized from my family: perfectionism, difficulty accepting help, the belief that I had to earn love through achievement or sacrifice. "The goal isn't to never think about your family again," Dr. Reynolds explained. "It's to reach a place where thoughts of them don't destabilize you, where you can acknowledge the reality of your relationship without it defining your sense of self-worth." I maintained my weekly calls with grandmother Rachel, who provided occasional updates about my family when appropriate. Through her, I learned that Brooke and Bradley were having financial difficulties after their extravagant wedding and honeymoon. "They moved into that big house in Brookline," grandmother told me. "Now they're struggling with the mortgage payments. Your parents have been helping them out." I felt a twinge of concern but recognized it wasn't my responsibility to fix. My sister and her husband were adults who would need to make their own financial decisions, just as I had. About 7 months after the wedding, I received an unexpected email from my mother. The subject line read, "Simply checking in." The message was brief and notably lacking an apology or acknowledgement of what had transpired. "Ashley, just wondering how you're doing. Dad and I saw that your company won that marketing award. Brooke and Bradley are doing well. Let us know if you'd like to reconnect. Mom." I showed the email to Dr. Reynolds during our next session. "What do you make of this?" she asked. "It feels like they want to pretend nothing happened," I replied. "There's no mention of the ultimatum, the cutting off, any of it." "That's often how these cycles work," she explained. When the previous conflict becomes inconvenient, it's swept under the rug rather than addressed. How does this make you feel? I considered carefully. Less than I expected. A year ago, I would have been desperate for this olive branch, however inadequate. Now, I'm okay either way. I can respond politely without being pulled back into old patterns. My response to my mother was cordial but maintained clear boundaries. Hi Mom, thanks for reaching out. I'm doing well, the award was a team effort that we're proud of. I hope everyone is healthy and happy. Best, Ashley. No pretense that everything was back to normal, no rushing to reconnect, but no burning bridges either. My parents took my lead, responding with similarly surface-level communication. We established a distant but civil relationship, occasional emails, brief birthday calls, nothing deep or potentially volatile. It wasn't the close family bond one had once longed for, but it was honest, and that counted for something. Brooke, surprisingly, was the one who eventually reached out more meaningfully. A year and a half after her wedding, she sent me an email that showed the first real self-awareness I'd ever seen from her. I'd been thinking a lot about how things went down with the wedding. Looking back, I can see how crazy the whole situation was. Bradley and I should never have expected you to contribute so much money. I was caught up in what I thought a perfect wedding should be, and Mom and Dad encouraged it. Now we're drowning in debt, and I'm starting to see some patterns. Can we talk sometime? That email led to a cautious coffee meeting when I was in Boston for a work conference. Sitting across from my sister at a quiet cafe, I saw her clearly for perhaps the first time, not as the favored golden child who had everything handed to her, but as someone who had been shaped by the same dysfunctional family system, just from a different position. They're already pressuring us about having kids, Brooke confided, stirring her latte nervously. Bradley and I aren't ready financially, but Mom keeps talking about how she needs grandchildren before she's too old to enjoy them. I recognized the manipulation tactics immediately. What do you want to do? I asked, rather than offering advice. Brooke looked startled, as if no one had ever asked her that question before. I don't know. I've always just done what they expected. That conversation marked the beginning of a new kind of relationship with my sister, not immediately close, but more honest than we'd ever been. We weren't best friends, but we were finding our way toward being actual sisters rather than competitors in our parents' dysfunctional game. When I finally found my perfect condo, a sun-filled two-bedroom with a view of Lake Union, I hosted a small housewarming party with my chosen family. Looking around at the people who truly cared about me, I realized I had created something precious and genuine. Madison raised her glass for a toast. To Ashley, who built this beautiful life through determination, integrity, and courage. As everyone clinked glasses, I felt a profound sense of peace. The journey had been painful, but I had emerged stronger, wiser, and surrounded by authentic love. The most valuable lesson I'd learned wasn't about money or even family, it was about self-worth. I no longer measured my value by others' approval or by what I could provide them. I knew who I was and what I deserved. Sometimes disappearing from a toxic situation isn't an ending, it's a beginning. The space created by walking away from what hurts you becomes room for something better to grow. So if you're facing a similar situation, unreasonable demands, emotional manipulation, impossible choices, remember this: you have the right to set boundaries. You have the right to say no. And sometimes, stepping away is the most powerful act of self-love you can perform. I'd love to hear your thoughts on this story. Have you ever had to choose between your financial future and family expectations? Did you face an ultimatum that turned out to be a blessing in disguise? Share your experiences in the comments below, and don't forget to like, subscribe, and share this video if it resonated with you. Remember, recognizing your own worth isn't selfish, it's the foundation of every healthy relationship you'll ever have. Thank you for listening to my story, and I hope it helps you navigate your own journey with courage and self-compassion.